Rawat sir, you will start.
Sir, we can start, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, hello. Very good evening, one and all. In the connection of the webinar series, today we are going to conduct the webinar on pandemic and the politics of life. And today is the webinar chief guest, Professor Ranveer Samdar. He is the distinguished chair in the migration and forced migration studies, the Calicut Research Group of the Kolkata, India. So, on behalf of the Parul University, on behalf of the Parul University management, we welcome to you, sir. We welcome to you, sir, on PU webinar platform on behalf of the Parul University President, sir, Vice Chancellor, and Registrar, sir. And now I over to you, Dr. Sonali, for the detailed introduction. Please, Dr. Sonali.
So right now we are among with that person. We are connected to that person who is very intellectual, and I respect him a lot in my life, and I have learned a great deal from him. So his name is V. Samadar. He's a distinguished chair in migration and forced migration studies, Kolkata Research Group, and he belongs to the critical school of thinking, and he has pioneered along with others peace studies program in South Asia, uh, and uh, and he also extensively on the issues of justice rights in the context of conflict in South Asia, and he is considered as one of the foremost theories in migration and forced migration studies. And his influential work is the marginal nation transborder migration from Bangladesh to West Bengal. And his recent works are the Karl Marx, not recent, but in 2018. He wrote on a Karl Marx and the post-colonial age and the crisis of 1974, railway strike and the rank and the file in 2016. And beyond Kolkata, he also Rajahat and the dystopia of urban immigration. And right now, his most recent publication is written in a background of COVID pandemic and the pandemic, the politics of life in 2021. So now I pass on to Ranveer Samadar to go ahead with his intellectual thoughts and how he can add something to your learning. Sir, please.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Sonali, and thanks to the university and colleagues in the department. I am happy to join this discussion, even though it is distance, and hopefully we can connect directly one day. And Sonali, a particular thanks to you for thinking of me and reaching out. And I recall now our meeting in Durham as well as in our winter course which you attended. I want to tell you also that the winter workshop, it still continues each year in November, but it is now a research workshop, and earlier it was for 15 days and now it is for 6 days. And research papers are invited and presented here, and with the same degree of intensity and the variety of backgrounds in which the papers are written and other creative writings are presented there, that remains. I want to discuss in brief the book that Sonali has mentioned, A Pandemic and the Politics of Life. And after I briefly describe what I have argued in the book, I look forward to the discussion. And I told Sonali also that I don't want to speak much, but I rather want to have a discussion with you and hear questions from you, your comments and interventions in the arguments that I have made. I sent the PDF of the book to Sonali. I don't know whether you got a chance to go through the book. It's not a big book. so perhaps you have lived through it. It is available in the market over Amazon or others, and it is published by Women Unlimited. Now, this book came out in April, and the book is written in the context of the experiences of the pandemic last year. The book describes the in brief, the historical background in which the epidemic arrives in India, which we know by the name of COVID-19. And the book then goes on to argue how the migrant crisis, which was sparked off by the sudden imposition of a nationwide lockdown the night of 24th, 25th of March 2020, with barely 5 hours of notice, and how the migrant crisis became the symbol of the overall crisis, which included the economic crisis, the political crisis, and the public health crisis in the country. In the third section, I describe the kind of responses this crisis, the general crisis of COVID-19, elicited from the society, and I show that basically these responses were of two types. One is a biopolitical response from the top, from above, and the second is the response from below, from the lower classes, the migrant communities, and others. And finally, I sum up the major arguments of the book by saying that the politics that we see around COVID-19 is a new kind of politics, in the sense that it may be termed as the politics of life. So this is, in brief, very briefly, what I have argued in the book. I will tell now in little details of each of these 4 sections for another 10 to 15 minutes, and then have the discussion, open up the discussion so that you can all join and ask for elucidation or elaboration, object, raise questions, so that the discussion is enriched. Now, even though the COVID-19 crisis apparently proved Indians by surprise, however, such crises are not new. People, if you read ancient histories, I mention in the book the history written by Thucydides on the Peloponnesian Wars, and there Thucydides writes how great Athenian like Pericles perished in the plague. The plague continued for more than 50 years. Hundreds and thousands of the Greeks died. And Thucydides' conclusion was that Thucydides' own father, his father died. And Thucydides said that this plague epitomized the general decline, the moral crisis of the Greeks who could not observe rules of life, who were not faithful to gods, and therefore the Greeks suffered. Marx writes of the plague that was one of the most important factors contributing to the decline of the Roman Empire, the breakup of the Roman Empire. And because it happened in the time of Emperor Justinian, it's called the Justinian plague. Plague was also active, or plague actively contributed to the decline of the major kingdoms and territories in the 13th century, brought about a change in the landowning patterns. Plague was again a recurrent scourge in the towns in the early modern era in the 16th century. And come to think of our own country, in the late 19th century, you had the infamous plague of Mumbai, now Mumbai and Pune. And as you know, the Chapekar brothers, they became martyrs when they killed British official Rand, who imposed restrictions on people. And of course, then the great influenza epidemic of 1918-19, which victimized millions of Indians. It is said that apparently 1/6 of the Indian working population died because of the influenza epidemic. Also, we had through these decades of while we were subjected to colonial rule of the malaria and cholera, the biggest scourges of Indians. And therefore, it was no surprise that after India became independent, eradicating malaria became the first task of the national health authorities of the first independent India's government, the Nehru government. And eradication of malaria was, with all its limits, the first achievement of the Nehru government, even though malaria returned later, which is a different story. So epidemics have visited mankind or humankind, and certainly India again and again. And therefore, our response to epidemic was perhaps surprisingly, but maybe human history tells us that this is how it happens, that we were taken by surprise, even though we were hearing what is happening. But if you think of December, January, February, March 2020, and later on you can see the lack of preparedness, and later on the desperate efforts by governments at center in the states. The whole atmosphere of being taken in by surprise. And there is a lot to read through this so-called state of unpreparedness of the rulers. If we get time, we can go into that. There is also this idea that, as I said, this idea that the epidemic came from outside. So, and everywhere, that's the feeling. We were all doing fine. We were safe. but the germ or the virus, it came from outside. And this danger from outside now jeopardizing our life, our society, our work, is the way in which we have been repeatedly reacted to the epidemic. It shows two, three things. One, that we do not take the epidemiological history seriously. We are unmindful, or we neglect the fact, or unmindful of the fact that epidemics play a big role in reshaping societies. Second, that management of public health, expansion of public health infrastructure, importance of public health, significance of public health in defending the society against epidemics is something that Indian state and Indian political system, Indian social system have been criminally negligent of. And third, this idea of the enemy from outside also leads us to a kind of a false search, the search for what in epidemic literature is called the patient zero. Meaning, who is the original carrier? The original carrier, who is responsible for contagion, for spread of the disease? So the disease, on one hand, we think that the disease doesn't have its own logic, that there is an agent that is carrying the disease. So if yesterday it was the cow in mad cow disease, or mosquito for malaria, etc., etc., today it is the virus, but the virus is being carried by human being. And therefore, you can see, I am anticipating the argument in the second chapter, that when the migrants were stopped from leaving the cities in the wake of the lockdown, and they were denied of advance information, they were denied of assistance, they were denied of any ready-made sustenance, provisions of sustenance. One of the basic things was that the migrants should stay put in the place they were, because if they travel, they carry the disease. And this is why you had this many scenarios like that infamous picture where, I think in UP, if I'm not wrong, but that happened in every state, including my state, where migrants were parted together, put in one place, made to sit, and then DDT was sprayed on them. So, in the AIDS literature, if you read the literature on AIDS, you will see that again there was this search for the original patient. Someone is the original patient. And if we can find out that original patient, then we shall be able to stop the contagion. Now, you may think that this is, because of human ignorance or human innocence, but I will only mention one fact to argue that we are not innocent. We are guilty and culpable of, in many ways, of the massive loss of human lives. Michel Foucault has shown that how modes of social control and political control evolved from the way leprosy, from the way leprosy was controlled. Because as you know, the control of leprosy took place through externing the lepers. So in the city, the lepers were not allowed to stay. There would be always lepers colony. The lepers colony would be something which would be guarded, where other people will not go. You do not want to see the leper even, because if you see the leper, then you might be afflicted with leprosy. And usually they would be outside the towns. Now, so the society was controlled by externing, by putting outside the realm of the society those who were dangers to public health. In those days, leprosy was the very big danger. And now you cannot expel the plague-stricken population. The plague-affected person is within your family, is within your city. So the states then tried to control, encircle, isolate. And these, as you can see, are the ways in which our modes of rule have developed. So from externalizing the threat to the health of the society, we have now moved to isolating the menace to the health of the society. The migrant crisis happened in this middle. Now, you all know of what happened in 2020 and again in 2021, but in 2020 it was even more. As you know that hundreds and thousands of migrants, they desperately tried to leave the cities, go back to their homes. They had no food, no money. The house owners which they had rented in, didn't allow them to stay. The city authorities didn't take any responsibility for their survival, and they had to come out on the street and start walking. Newspapers, public media, human experiences, photographers, solidarity groups, mutual aid associations all came forward to beam live and to talk of what is now known in the migrant crisis. The matter reached the Supreme Court. The Solicitor and the Additional Solicitor General of the Government of India said that the government had no information, statistical information, and the government was evidently taken unprepared. The judge, in fact, the Chief Justice, initially said that if they are getting food, what else do they require? But happily and luckily, unfortunately, the judiciary also started taking note of the enormous crisis. Finally, after 4 months, the migrant crisis came to some kind of end, where about 100 people died in the trains. The trains were like moving infernos in the summer. They were special trains. They had to pay. In many cases, migrants paid. In many cases, state governments paid. In many cases, some good Samaritans paid. There was, in that sense, no free assistance, and many died in the trains on the platforms. But many more died actually on the roads. And by a rough estimate, or there are several estimates, but by a rough estimate, about 800 to 900 workers died during the trek back of hundreds of kilometers. The question that I want to ask, and I want you to all think, is that this crisis, which is known as the migrant crisis, not the usual question, which is, was it inevitable? Of course it wasn't, but there was a kind of a panic, there was a kind of, as I said, management technique that gave less importance to the precariousness of a section of population and more importance to, as if there are outside carriers who are endangering the society. But more important, that this migrant crisis is actually the signal for as I say, the economic crisis. The country's GDP had started going down from 2016-17 following demonetization. Then came the GST. There were several reasons, which is the outside the purview of this discussion. There was a political crisis in the country over the legality and debates. Again, I cannot take sides. Up to you over the NRC and the CA, but there was a political crisis. And thirdly, there was this public health crisis. So the public health crisis, as you know, was sought to be tackled, and it's still being tackled on the basis of two legal templates. One is the Epidemic Diseases Control Act, which the British had designed and deployed, promulgated and deployed in 1896, 97, 98 in the wake of the Pune and the Mumbai plague, which gives the power to declare lockdown, to encircle certain areas, to stop people from going out, to forcibly take away people from, into doing certain things, which we all think will be dangerous to public health. So if there is someone afflicted in your house, you want to immediately take him or her, isolate him so that you are safe. So the colonial approach, which was a more law and order oriented approach, is embedded in the Epidemic Diseases Act, Control Act. And the second legal template that was invoked was the National Disaster Management Act, which centralizes all powers in the hands of the state, that's the central government. And you may reasonably ask, can a public health crisis be termed as a disaster? And is it the way you should look at a public health crisis? Or should you look at it as a kind of unique thing? It's not an environmental crisis. Like an environmental crisis is not an economic crisis, or an economic crisis is not a political crisis. They are separate, they're distinct in their nature, and each of them require distinct governmental, scientific, economic, ecological, public health tools. Similarly, an outbreak of an epidemic, what are the tools with which you can control? And I think that is where, in the third chapter, I argue that the law and order oriented approach, the lopsided emphasis on lockdown, the other emphasis on isolation, the emphasis on various other measures, these are generally responses from the top, from the administration, from the rulers. That's the way you look at how to stop an epidemic. Whereas the life that is put in a crisis, it is your life that is in crisis. The life of all Indians, or for that matter, people of the world. That demands much more than anything else, a radical expansion of public health facilities, hundreds and thousands of beds. That demands putting money in people's hands who do not have any jobs because of the lockdown. That demands immediate bread and butter and security for the migrants who will be left without jobs, for the unorganized workers, for scientific research on how to quickly bring out a vaccine or other medicines so that we can, as much as possible, make the people of the country safe. So one way of responding to the epidemic is forget everything but give importance to public health. And the other is a more law and order oriented approach which comes from the top. Now, I have argued in the kind of last but one section of the book that unfortunately we prioritized in favor of the former and neglected the later. And as you know, I have shown in my book, you may read it, I have shown that in 2020, the comparison of beds available in public health sector and private health sector. The availability of ICUs in public health institutions and in private health institutions. The availability of doctors. And I have shown how these were already skewed in favor of the private enterprise. An epidemic cannot be controlled by private health arrangement. Epidemic is a certain thing that needs and must be controlled with the leadership of the state. It is the government, it is the state that will be primarily planning and saving the people. And private players will do only so much that can help their profits to increase. No one has till date said that the private industry has suffered. No, it hasn't happened. It is the government that is putting out money from its pocket, whether it is the central government or the state government or the local governments, etc. And if you look at the responses from the people below to the epidemic, you can see this is what I call the biopolitics from below, the politics of life, where villagers, there are, if please check our website, there is an archive which is called the Living Archive. It is on the migrant labor during the epidemic, where we are showing that in villages, villagers took upon themselves to make themselves safe as much as possible. The migrants again adopted different modes or techniques to make themselves safe. The municipal governments tried to save the local people. And I have given various instances which you may call kind of an anthropological work or anthropological observation about how the society responded. Care workers, medical workers, public health activities, doctors, nurses, those who produce the masks, the workers on the assembly line producing ventilators. Think of all the instruments that you need, people who are engaged in producing them. Specialists, all of them were what is called the frontline worker. And if you ask how many of them and how much of them, or to what degree they have been involved in managing the epidemic, I would say very little. In each state, there may be an advisory committee. In each centrally, there is ICMR and all that. But at below, social institutions, community institutions, if you talk of caregivers, if you think of the informal caregivers in our society and the formal caregiver in hospitals and nursing homes, you know that the informal caregivers are much more in number. What happened to them? Did they have any role? Or those who were suppliers of your daily necessities when the lockdown was on, who was providing you with bread, butter, vegetable, meat, fish, your milk, everything. Those who are, you may call, these are supply chain workers. These are workers who are employed in what is called platform economy or gig economy. What happened to them? But within the epidemic, as I said, we are not innocent. We knew where our priorities lie. So emergency services were all on. Shipping services didn't come to a standstill. In dock and port, people worked. Trains ran, essential trains, etc., etc. And while migrants could not find any transportation, but Indians who were suddenly stranded abroad, they were given transportation so that they could come back. So we knew where our priorities lie. So in some sense, epidemics creates or epidemics occasions the emergence of what I call the politics of life. Politics is woven around the question of life. How many MPs do you have? How many MLAs do you have? How many panchayat members? They matter less to the people. What matters more is how are you going to save them? It is the life that is at stake. And what happens when life question becomes the most important question of politics? This is something with discussion on that issue. I close the book. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. I open this house for the discussion. Anybody can ask anything, or you would like to add something to what Professor Ranveer Samadar has just said. So you can ask him anything. Sir, as we have some students from Hindi medium, so I hope if they ask you something in Hindi, then you can reply.
Yes, I shall. I can understand Hindi. So, but I will maybe I will try to reply in Hindi. But I do not know Hindi well, so I will reply in English. Please.
Moni, Max, Neelam, or anybody would like to ask anything, you can. Neelam? Okay, sir. Yes, Neelam. Anybody? Max?
Yes, ma'am, I am here.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Happy Singh. Sir, recently US has imposed birth control that comes under the biopolitics. Is it good or bad? Without imposing any politics over the health, habit, and reproduction, is it good in politics?
You see, I cannot answer whether it is good or bad, but I thank you very much for raising this question because, as I said, that this is not an innocent thing. So, this is clearly one instance of certain life questions become political question. So, if you think that, meaning the question of birth control or controlling population growth, the thing to ask would be, does it have the imprint of power, social power, political power, economic power? These control measures, do they affect the sections of society evenly, equally, or do they impact the society unevenly, discriminating?
Yes.
And how is the control measure introduced? How much of that will be persuasion? How much of that will be through force? Whether it is accompanied by other measures of duress. So, all those questions that are linked to power, that whether it is an innocent thing or this is something that is figured by the way in which power is exercised in society, is something that you'd have to think for yourself, and it's a very important question.
Yes, sir. As I know that United States is an democratic country, so is this fine for the people of an democratic country that the government is imposing power over them, that they have to control over the birth of infants?
I could not follow this question. Please repeat it and a little louder.
Okay, sir. So I am saying that, sir, that US is a democratic country.
US.
Yes, sir. United States.
Okay.
Sir, United States is a democratic country, and the government of United States use biopolitics by saying that the citizens have to control over the birth rate. So, is this fine for the citizen of US?
I do not know whether United States says, I haven't heard of it. I know there are other countries, but United States saying that its citizens would have birth control, I haven't heard of that. What United States has done is that with regard to certain migrant sections of population, they may say that the migrants are begetting children, their migrant population is increasing, etc. But in general, the birth control measures in United States, in Europe, in Canada, why should they do it? Because their birth rate has fallen. They need labor from outside. They are not like India where we have enough labor. But in United States, the states they would come to a standstill. European economy would come to a standstill if migrant workers are not there.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Neelam, you can ask your question.
Yeah, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Sir, my question is, uh, इस पैंडेमिक में जो भी इलेक्शन हुए उसके वजह से काफ़ी लोग की लाइक बहुत से लोगों की डेथ हो गई ड्यू टू इलेक्शन के वजह से वी सी बंगाल में देखा हमने इलेक्शन के थ्रू क्या कैसे हुआ एंड जितने भी इलेक्शन हुए उससे कितने सारे लोगों को इफेक्ट हुआ कोविड का और उससे कई लोगों की जान गई तो सर इट इज़ ये ज़रूरी था इलेक्शन ड्यू टू पैंडेमिक में क्योंकि ये कोविड एक ऐसी सिचुएशन है जहाँ पे हम जितना हो सके उतना खुद को सेफ रख सके तो सर ये सही था कि गवर्नमेंट ने सही किया कि इलेक्शन करवा के और लाखों लोगों की जान खतरे में डाल के सर
Again, it's a very intelligent and good question. I cannot say whether it was good or bad, but I can again tell you that uh, you have raised an important thing. If we think, I mean, we have to think of this. I mean, in what is this situation or what to say of the political system of a country where the lives of people are in danger and we still think that elections can be held in this way. I am not saying that elections could have been done away with, but I am quite sure that the central government could have discussed this much ahead, not after the elections were discussed with the local governments, the governors, other stakeholders, political parties, about whether the elections could be postponed by, let us say, by a year or by 6 months, etc. One. Second is, I'm reasonably sure that the Election Commission was in many ways responsible for what had happened. The Election Commission thought that the Bihar elections had taken place apparently without much increase in infection, therefore they could do it. First of all, Election Commission should have taken the inputs from the ICMR, from the task force that the government had set up, from the local, again, task force, that whether it was advisable to go ahead with the election, or whether they should allow the local governments to continue, and whether the measures that the Election Commission thought was enough in terms of securing the population from public health danger, whether they were enough. As you know, in Bengal, more than 100,000 paramilitary forces were brought in. No one was checked for the RT-PCR test. No one was tested. It was a very, very sad situation. Even though some of the COVID protocols were put in place and the Election Commission thought that was enough, but you know, in UP, again, primary teachers died in quite large number, and the Panchayat election again brought a havoc. So I am not saying that elections were to be postponed suddenly, But this much we can say, that the Election Commission could not have gone ahead or should not have gone ahead without the explicit consultation and kind of a green signal from the scientific bodies. It is science. It's not your wish, my wish. It is the doctors, the epidemiologists, the public health specialists, those who work on infections. They have to tell us, is it safe? So their inputs needed to be, because it was life that was at question. I think we have learned the lesson, but at great cost to the lives of our own people. I mean, you all have relatives and friends, one or the other, who died. Central ministers died, many state ministers died. So it's not a question of one party or another, or one government or another, but it's a question of the general, how do you put it, the danger to the lives of the people. And that is where, again and again, I think the judiciary could have probably taken a more proactive state. Now the judiciary, as you know, in case of the Rath Yatra and all that, judiciary takes proactive measures. So much cognizance, I think that the judiciary could. And the High Court responded in many of the things with very stern comments. And as you know, again, Supreme Court didn't like that the High Court should become very active and very vocal on this. So I think, all in all, law and our administration, again, central or state, I'm not saying anything like that, we have not been alert and dutiful to the question of life to the extent that we should have been. After all, right to life is a fundamental right, and the right to and the duty to protect life is the fundamental duty of the government, and whether that right is being maintained is the fundamental duty of the Supreme Court to see. So it was an all-round thing.
So much, sir. Yes, Moni, you can ask question.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, sir. And thank you for giving me opportunity, Sonali ma'am and Rawat sir. Sir, my question is, sir, how will the world reshape after the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of politics, economics, and job opportunities?
All I can say is that the COVID-19 is going to be a watershed. It will not be the same anymore. In other words, I'm not saying that, but job pattern will change. I told you of the platform economy, the supply workers, the cyclists who move from place to place carrying your provisions. You now order many of the things through your mobile phone. So occupational pattern will be changing. You are not inviting me or bringing me to your university. You can do this whole thing over website. So many new jobs will open. On the other hand, many old jobs will die. And certainly it will bring in a great crisis for the people who form the lower sections of society with less opportunity, less diversity of job openings to survive, to cope, to gather news, to get new skills, etc., etc. On the other hand, if you see, and a simple question, has the wealth of the wealthiest of India, has the wealth gone down because of the pandemic? Has the wealth gone down? What's the answer? The Indian GDP has gone down, but has the wealth gone down? The wealth of the wealthiest, those who have the biggest, big corporate giants, has their wealth gone down? What is your answer?
I think no, sir.
Yes. So production is going on. The production of wealth is going on. Only thing is that those who were poor, those who used to do different kinds of jobs, they are facing crisis. They they will be given other kinds of jobs, which will not probably be, there will be a greater degree of impoverishment, immiserization, precariousness all around. So old work pattern will change, old political pattern will change. State governments which now have seen and have realized that finally when the fire reaches the home, it has to manage. It cannot depend on, Kerala cannot depend on Karnataka or Delhi. Kerala government has to save itself. Gujarat government cannot depend on West Bengal or Delhi. It has to save itself. Or West Bengal government cannot depend on Delhi. It has to save itself. So each government now knows that finally, after all the quarrels with the center or quarrels with each other, finally the fire is now reaching the government at the lower level, in the municipality, in the panchayat, in the state governments, in the districts. That is where the actual fight against the pandemic is going on. Delhi, in that sense, is Durast. Delhi is far as a seat of administration, as the seat of the Indian state. But the fire is reaching your home. Now you cannot think of Kab mera madad aayega, when help will come. You have to think of to do something so that you can save yourself. So it increases your confidence, it increases your assertiveness that when the danger came, I had to save myself. Nobody came, or people came, they came with less help. The way I needed help, I didn't get it. Let's say I needed X amount of money, but I got only X minus 1. I needed Y amount of vaccines, I got only Y minus 2. So if I could have managed the crisis all through, so states will become assertive, there will be more conflicts, there will be new demand to reshape federalism, many things will change, and life will not be the same. So we shall say maybe 10 years later that life before COVID-19 and life after COVID-19. I think I will stop here. There is probably one more question or two, and then we can stop.
Danka, yes, you can ask question.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Professor, for your talk, and I thank the organizers also for organizing this event. Now I'm taking part in this from Germany, so it's afternoon here. I would actually just like to give to ask something. I'm not a political scientist, so I'm philosopher as concerns my background. So my question is more general. So I hope that this is okay to ask such a question. At the beginning of your talk, you said that this idea of politics of life is actually the new politics that will actually emerge in the wake of this pandemic. And so I would like to ask you maybe to just elaborate a little bit more on this idea of politics of life, because there are already these discussions about biopolitics, and maybe what's the difference between the idea of a politics of life and biopolitics? If the question is, I hope that question is clear, it's quite general. So what exactly is meant by politics of life as a new politics? Do you also think this will have to become official politics, as like I think you said a lot about this, but maybe just elaboration of this idea?
You see, when I use the word politics of life, there are several connotations that I want to indicate. One is that in my book, I use the word biopolitics from below. Now, if you go into some of the Foucault's or others' explanations of what is biopolitics, the general explanation has been that while pre-modern politics and pre-modern sovereignty depended on the power of the king or the monarch, the emperor or the state to take people's lives, life of the people. Your power to take someone else's life proved your hold over society. And it has been argued that today governments want to control your life by control you. For politics is a politics that ensures your life, and your control over society depends on you control the politics from below is something which takes off from the idea of biopolitics but roots it or plants it firmly in the responses to the lower orders, responses to the crisis of society by the lower orders, how they face a war, how they face an epidemiological crisis, how they face a climate disaster, how they face a flood, more importantly, how they face famines. Now, biopolitics in general has been an optic from the top. It looks at how society, power over society, how it evolves, latching on to the question of life. Whereas biopolitics from below specifically cites this question in the life of the people, which has its own subaltern and relatively autonomous existence. Now, when I say politics of life, again, this I draw from others, but politics of life doesn't mean that other issues are being raised, but how issues of politics become now life and death issues. A simple explanation would be that supply of food. Now, if in your area the supermarket doesn't have a particular food item, you may go to another supermarket and you may find it. It's not your life and death question. But in a war where availability of food will be controlled, or in a famine where you will see your mother dying, your kith and kin dying, your villagers are dying, you have to run away, you are selling your child, and all those descriptions of famines that we read, their food supply becomes the question of life. So politics of life doesn't mean that we have other issues, but the conventional issues of politics becomes now life and death questions. So in that sense, those who speak of biopolitics actually do not give enough importance to the question of life. Finally, the politics of life, the specific way in which politics will be configured, those who are in India will know that last year there was a case in Supreme Court where 6 state governments or 4 state governments made an appeal to the Supreme Court to cancel the joint entrance examination and technological admission to technical universities, NEET as it called, because they said that forcing the candidates to give in-person examination, to appear in person for examination, was threatening their life. Supreme Court negated their appeal, but the appeal of the state governments for cancelling a particular examination mode was coined in the term of life. So life question, even from the angle of the subaltern classes, is not something which is context free. It emanates from certain specific context of crisis. That's why I said that the public health crisis didn't come against a clean background. The background was already crisscrossed with many fault lines of economy, politics, etc. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like to thank you to all. I'm sending my thank you to everyone who have participated in this webinar, and we really appreciate your presence here. So now I will wrap up the whole webinar and the discussion. So the 3 themes that the focus on, that the outbreak as an epidemiological crisis compounded by the economic crisis, and which is also a migrant crisis and a political crisis. and the presence of the marching migrant as a figure of the crisis. And next is the emergence of the biopolitics from below as a reaction of the lower classes. So now, sir, I have a very small question. Now, as you said, that the governments are doing good enough, but there is a, like within a state there are oxygen politics, supply of oxygen. As Kejriwal said that some states have stopped our oxygen supplies. They are not letting the oxygen to come into this Delhi, and they have stopped that. And moreover, when he leaked their meeting, why the transparency is not being followed in the governmental meeting related to COVID-19, so that people gets to know what government is really doing for them? Why this politicization is so much between the states? Actually, they are the citizen of India. They are not specifically, and humanity is the biggest religion to preach. It's not Indian or it's not African. If somebody needs the vaccine and you have it, or somebody have the enough oxygen, then one should supply that. And within India, when we will not have the solidarity, or we will not have the caring attitude in terms of the state, then who will care for the common masses?
What is it a question for me?
Yes, I'm asking you, what do you think on this?
I mean, you have given the answer. You see, it is a war, and war, it is not a war only against the epidemic. It is a war among different social classes, different states, war between the center and the states, war between the rich and the poor. It's a social war, all-round social war that has been triggered off by the COVID-19 crisis. So, as I said, by wish, things do not happen. So, if you think you have only X number of oxygen, first of all, people will ask, what were you doing? You knew that the things are not over. What were you doing? You know, the questions therefore have been raised, that with PM Care Fund or other funds, why did we not? And who will be responsible? Now, you cannot say that in war, the responsibility question will not be there. For a defeat, you make generals responsible. You make leaders responsible. For defeats in political battles, in elections, you make party leadership responsible. So you cannot avoid responsibility. Second, if you know that you have X amount of oxygen, then you know that there are stakeholders, let us say 100 stakeholders. Do you have you told that this is the money, this is the number of the oxygen thing, this is how I am going to distribute it? So therefore, when states fight out against each other, it's not surprising. If in your family there is only one piece of bread and 5 boys or 5 young girls who haven't ate for 3 days, do you think they will discuss? They will try to grab whatever little they have to survive. So I think it's, as you say, it's a question of transparency. Unless you are transparent, unless you have clarity, unless you have reposed your faith on the state governments, how you are following your vaccination policy. This is the same thing.
Okay.
The government has said to the court, so it will all depend on how much democratic you are in your handling of the COVID crisis. That's all I can say.
Okay, sir. Now I would ask Ramesh Rawat, sir, to end this webinar with the concluding remarks. So, and thank you, Professor Ranveer Samadar, with us. Parul, I am mentioning thank you on a behalf of our whole Parul family, and we will have you physically with us in the Parul University when everything will be offline. So we are heading towards that. So from August onwards, everything will be offline in our university, and in future we will definitely invite you, so that our staff, our students will learn great deal from you on the migrants issue and refugee issue. So thank you so much, Rawat sir. Okay, I think he's not there. So thank you so much, sir. You have enlightened us.
Thank you.
uh,
My thanks to you also.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's remain in touch,
Yes.
and Sonali, keep on checking our website. You will see different announcements of programs and all that.
Okay, sure, sir.
Okay. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.